Hi, David. I'm deeply concerned that Israel is not focusing on the big challenge of the nuclear deal. Rather than trying to focus on Ukraine, I expect the Prime Minister and the whole government, the whole Israeli government, to focus here in the United States and other places to raise the concern that the Iranian nuclear deal that they want to sign is a huge threat. And haven't we learned from what happened in Ukraine? I mean, a lot of people did not believe that Russia will invade Ukraine, and now they're putting sanctions on Russia. So you're going to lift the sanctions from Iran and give them a prize? This is not focusing on the big threat that Israel has right on our head. And we have to be here and state out the big threat, not only to Israel, but to the whole world.
So it sounds like it's safe to say Israel won't be satisfied with any new Iran deal, at least as it's been formulated to this point. And on top of that, then, if not, what does Israel do at that point?
Well, I'm here to ring the bells and the alarm bells and to speak to our friends here in Washington and other places. I'm in New York and in Boston and Los Angeles, and to refocus them on the big, huge threat. And by the way, I want to talk about another threat while I'm here. The conventional threat. There are 250,000 rockets around Israel. And the nuclear deal has not a word about the terror and the proxies that Iran has around Israel. They want to attack us with 250,000 rockets. That is thousands, over 5,000 wreck sites with tens of thousands of Israelis hurt. And nobody's dealing with this issue. So I'm deeply concerned that our government is focused on the wrong issue. And rather than trying to mediate, we should be focusing on defending Israel. And unfortunately, nobody's speaking about that right now. And I hope that the government comes to its senses and deals with the real serious threat around Israel.
Now, these reports today talking about that Israel now leaning heavily on strengthening new ties with Gulf allies, United Arab Emirates in particular. Do they share the concerns that Iran is a top threat, Hezbollah, and are they involved with your efforts in the U.S. as well?
Yes, they understand. I think that our friends in the Emirates, I'm happy to say, understand very well the threat of Iran. The Iranians see a window of opportunity. They see that the world is confused. The world is focusing on helping Ukraine, which is fine. However, the Iranians see a window of opportunity to go ahead and prepare themselves. And maybe that the United States is sort of pulling out of the Middle East. There's no vacuum, and they want to fill that vacuum. And we have to close that vacuum and make sure they understand that if we get attacked from Lebanon, it's not going to be the third Lebanese war. It has to be the first Iranian war. And we must today align interests with the United States and make sure that Iran understands that if they use even the conventional war against us, we have to attack Tehran. By the way, this is something that is very similar to what President Kennedy did at the time of the Cuba missile crisis, that he basically said to the Russians that a missile coming from Cuba, a proxy of Russia, will be met by a missile going to Moscow. And he very clearly understood that using proxies is not going to let Russia off the hook at the time. Similarly, we must focus on Iran and say to them that missiles from the proxies that they're funding and helping here in Lebanon will be missiles back at Tehran. Now, the world is not there yet. We have to very aggressively get the world to understand that threat and make sure that Iran fears to attack Israel with its proxies and, of course, never allow them to have a nuclear bomb.
Now, with all the focus on Ukraine, as you mentioned here, are you struggling to get the attention of critical lawmakers, decision makers on the Iran issue? Do you have a sense that it's a lower priority for officials in the U.S.?
Unfortunately, especially because the Israeli government is not voicing out the threat. So if Israel doesn't voice out, why should they focus on Iran? And that is why I'm here. I'm here to make sure that we wake the people up and make sure they understand the big, serious threat that is now sort of under the table, but it did not disappear. The threat exists, and if anything, I think it became bigger because Iran thinks that it has a window of opportunity.
Another angle of this, are you dealing with or finding you have to overcome allegations that Israel's taken too soft a stance on Russia, even as a potential bypass route for Western sanctions on oligarchs?
In general, I don't think Israel is UN. We cannot play the UN. We are part of the Western world. And I'm happy that the government in the United Nations voted against the Russian aggression. I think it's not enough. We have to align interest and be part of the Western world. And then when we demand the Western world certain things against Iran, we have a moral standing to say so. And the reality is that it's a moral decision for us to make to be part of the Western world. So trying to be UN, eventually, we're going to get hurt from both sides. And I think that's not the right strategy.
Nir Barkat, lawmaker with the Likud party, member of parliament, thank you very much for being with us. I'll let you get back to the important work in the United States.
Pleasure. Thank you.